Let's talk about the plague of pornography for just a minute. Wow, this is one of the biggest issues that so many deal with in these latter days, but few talk about it or even know how to talk about it. And when they do talk about it, it's usually in a private setting with a leader who is expected to know how to navigate struggles with pornography. Thankfully, Leading Saints has put together a remarkable resource called Liberating Saints. It's a virtual library with 25 plus presentations focused on helping leaders be better prepared to help someone overcome struggles with pornography. We cover topics like how to minimize shame in the bishop's office, how to talk with children about pornography, and even how to talk about female pornography use in Relief Society. If you'd like to review the Liberating Saints library at no cost for 14 days, simply go to leadingsaints.org/14. That's leadingsaints.org/14. While you're at it, we'll give you access to all of our virtual libraries that cover several leadership-related topics. So click the link in the show notes or simply visit leadingsaints.org/14. Today, I get to interview one of the co-authors of Trust and Inspire, How Truly Great Leaders Unleash Greatness in Others, which just hit the Wall Street Journal best-selling list. David Kasperson, welcome to the Leading Saints podcast.
Hello, glad to be here.
Now, this is a little bit awkward for me, I must admit, because we're mission buddies. And somehow we both succeeded in the world of leadership, but your book's in airports and my mom listens to my podcast. So
did you tell your mom about my book?
I did. Yeah, she's halfway through, I'm sure. So, this is crazy because there we were, just two punk kids, Elder Kasperson and Elder Frankum in Sacramento, California. And did you think you'd write a book someday or help write a book?
I thought you would, but no, it's interesting. It's funny. I was really envious of people who had like career plans, as missionaries, and they kind of knew what they wanted to do. And I was excited that we planned a week, ahead of time. But no, had no idea that this was the direction we'd go. Great thing about a mission though, you spend time at a point in most people's life where they aren't worrying about like things of eternal consequence.
Right.
That's not on most people's plates. We're just trying to figure out how to get things going. And I think doing that and kind of changed my perspective, one, of having no idea where I wanted to go, but just made it real clear for me how having an eternal perspective can, impact, change things. Looking back, hindsight's 2020.
Now, your name is on here with Stephen M.R. Covey. Now, for people who hear Stephen Covey and don't realize that there's two Stephen Coveys in the world of business thought. Obviously, Stephen R. Covey, was that right? Who's passed on. He's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then Stephen M.R. Covey is his son. And you get to work with him every day. Stephen Covey.
Every day.
His protege, would you say?
Yeah, well, that I don't know if I'd use that term or not,
right.
but I'm lucky. We worked together. I worked on his team for about 16, 17 years and really hand in hand the last 12 or so. And it's been incredible.
That's cool.
It's been an awesome experience.
Nice. And so, he wrote The Speed of Trust. And is this his next? No, there was one more book after Speed of Trust.
Yeah, he wrote The Speed of Trust in 2006. New York Times bestseller, went on, did really, really well. I think it's the number one book on the topic of trust in the context of leadership in the world, published in 22 languages, done really, really well. He wrote a follow-on to that book called Smart Trust, which was more of a kind of a niche, like go a little bit deeper into the idea of trust and risk and things like that. So,
nice. Yeah. So let's jump into just some concepts of this book and phenomenal read. Like I couldn't recommend it more, especially like the brand new leader who's like, all right, where do I begin? I've been that leader, believe it or not, right? Where you just need a starting point. Like, how do I begin to lead in a way that is actually something I can think through and apply in a day-to-day manner? Basically the premise of it is dealing with command and control versus trust and inspire type. And these are two styles of leadership. So give us a breakdown of what, when we consider command and control, type of leadership? I mean, obviously it is what it is, but how would you break it down, and how do we misunderstand it at times?
Yeah. So the reason we use the term command and control, it has kind of a connotation for most people. You say that, it sounds kind of like a heavy-handed approach to leadership, which
almost tyrannical. Right?
Yeah, it can be. If this style of leadership, which the data shows 9 out of 10 organizations are still using to this day in some variation, and that variation, by the way, is important. I'll hit that in a second, but flows out of the industrial age, where the idea was that what leadership meant was getting work done or getting things done through people, which is not that doesn't sound like a negative thing, or a bad thing, and it's not. But in the industrial age, what they needed people to do was mostly manual labor types of things, physical kinds of things, where the idea was we need people to work as fast and as efficiently as possible. And so let's find what levers we can pull and what buttons we can push to make that happen, which gave rise to kind of the carrot and stick approach to leading people. Probably more stick in the beginning, and as time's gone on, more of the carrot side of things. So we kind of started there, the Industrial Revolution. That's progressed. We've made a ton of progress in this, and we've brought more emotional intelligence to it, more benevolence, more kindness, human resources kind of thinking, where we're recognizing that people have needs outside of just transactionally doing a job for a check or something like that. But for all of our progress today, most organizations are still kind of in this positional authority kind of viewpoint when it comes to leading people. And in the church and in the gospel setting, obviously we're not trying to get people to pull levers, but we are trying to help people align their lives to gospel principles that we know and believe will bring them happiness. The challenge is, as much as people do, they've also got to figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it. So we set up this system, this approach where we try to move people kind of along a certain pathway, and we've been given, commandments and kind of guidelines, and it's very easy, in a sense, to be obedient or compliant to a lot of those things, and yet not grow spiritually. And that's, I think, are the biggest challenge facing anybody in a spiritual sense, members of the church included today, is how do we help people move past the outward obedience kind of stuff, which is, again, we need that.
Yeah, it's important.
But how do we help people transcend that to where the reason they're doing the things that they're doing with regard to a calling or a neighbor or a friend is with the right, both the right style and the right intent. I think the intent is, especially in the church, pretty much a given. People are wanting to do good things, but sometimes our style or how we will do it can get in the way of our intent. And so this move from command and control, where we've progressed, what we call it is that most leaders and organizations right now are stuck in what we would define as enlightened command and control, which again is it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. I don't want to have any sinister connotation. It just lacks the power to really create personal change or help create conditions where people can change themselves. It's if you look at it as a continuum, it's more kind of trying to move up to a more complete, more relevant, more useful approach to people and leadership than what we've been doing in the past.
And we'd like to think that, there was obviously the restored gospel, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, an inspired institution. We'd like to think it's, free from these concepts of command and control, that we just come together and, love each other and we go out and serve. But I think we've all experienced even leadership within the church that was felt very command and control. And I love this contrast of obedience and being inspired, where, sometimes we go and we, visit a ministering family because we want to be obedient, and the elders quorum presence sort of on our case. So we go do it, but we'd much rather have people that go and visit and love people because they feel inspired to do so, right? They want to be that type of person, even though obedience is still a crucial point. Yeah.
I remember home teaching as a 14-year-old with my dad, home teaching back in the day. And, it was great. I had a good experience. We had these families that we really cared about. But I remember there were months and there were times where the reason we got out that month is because I was afraid of not getting out that month.
Right.
And so sometimes, even with the best of intentions, the thing that can drive our behavior is we're trying to avoid or move away from something instead of trying to move to something. I think you can see this growth and this progress in the church as well as anywhere else. So home teaching is a great example. I would classify home teaching under an enlightened command and control kind of approach.
Yeah.
Because what it does, you can be 100% home teacher and not be having great spiritual growth or be doing what we describe doing and ministering, but you could still check all the boxes and do all the things. Yeah. In fact, I remember I was an elders quorum president in a ward when I was in my 20s. And I remember looking at, I felt like my job, my responsibility was to drive home teaching numbers, not so that they looked good, but I genuinely felt like, the numbers, the thing we measure, that indicates some level of spiritual health and things that are going on. And I remember my wife would tell me about the kind of stuff that, I'm doing air quotes, counted for visiting teaching. And I thought, okay, you're going to pass cookies off and count that as visiting. teaching?
Write a letter, right? You can't write a letter.
And I remember at the time thinking, this is kind of a cop-out, but it's interesting. I'll bet there were a lot more experiences where people were visit taught and had something dropped off at their doorstep where they felt more cared about than they did when Brother Kasperson shows up on the 31st at 7:30 in the evening. So that we can say, I did it. I followed.
Yeah. And I appreciate this concept of enlightened command and control, because again, we've probably experienced a really heavy command and control leader. That's like, the guilt trip lessons, always on our case. You can tell he's mainly, pushing numbers because he wants to look good rather than, creating a positive experience. But I think what's really crucial about this is recognizing those with the best intentions who are striving to be good and loving leaders can still fall in this command and control arena, but it's enlightened command and control, like home teaching, or, let's just do these things. And there's sort of this prodding or whatnot, but it's not heavy, but that always comes back to like, well, couldn't we be doing more and whatnot? But how would you break down further just enlightened command and control that we may be missing? Yeah.
So consider the idea of, I mentioned that if you take command and control and add a bunch of kindness and benevolence to it, I'm sure you did too, had missionary companions or leaders, or have had leaders in the church who, they take their role very seriously. It's a calling, and they've accepted that and they view it that way. And so sometimes in our effort to fulfill our calling or our stewardship, we might over focus on the program and the processes, because those are things that are supposed to work at the expense sometimes of people.
Yeah. Like we don't want the ball to be dropped. We just need this activity to come together. I know too, less active families coming. We've got to make this work. And so then you're micromanaging and hovering and commanding and controlling.
Yeah. I
right?
remember you talked one time about Stephen R. Covey's book, The Divine Center. And in that he gives
awesome book.
I love that.
Thanks
book.
to you. You recommended it to me. Right?
I did recommend that to you.
It's fantastic.
In that book, he talks about the role of the church is to be more of like scaffolding to building the kingdom of God. And he shares a story that he would describe as being command and control as well, where it's time to get ready for church. And in the effort of getting to church where we can grow in our faith and we can partake of the sacrament and be reverent, we are just yelling at our kids to get out the door. Why didn't somebody do this? Hurry up, get in the car.
This never happens in my household.
What we're doing is we're stepping on our most important responsibility and stepping over that in order to do the outward things that we've got to do. And so the biggest challenge with enlightened command and control is that most of the time, the people which is all of us, most of the time when we're doing it, we feel like we're justified, or might not even see that we're missing something, in the process of leading that way, because again, all the outward signs show, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we feel this, what we might describe as almost a righteous indignation.
Yeah.
Especially as
term came to mind.
Yeah. We look at, sometimes you look in a marriage, in a relationship, and you might be trying to do your best to, keep your covenants and follow the gospel and do all the things that you've, again, covenanted to do. And maybe from your perspective, your spouse is not on the same page with you. And so what happens is, instead of taking an approach that, again, the Savior models really well, we start to feel concerned, and we start to feel like kind of this sense of fear enter in about, well, how do I talk about this with somebody? You see this especially going on right now with LGBTQ plus concerns, or people leaving the church, or other kinds of things where somebody's path, where they've been on the same path for a long time, it starts to diverge as somebody's either learned something about themselves, or they've learned something that's caused them to have a concern or some other thing. And in our efforts to try and hold them tighter so that they don't fall, we end up suffocating their ability to growth, their ability to grow. Command and control will do a great job at holding people on a particular line, but it's not the best way to help people become who they were sent here to become, and figure out the things about themselves they need to learn.
And so again, this gives, I think, a lot of leaders listening to this, you can't just say, well, I'm not a tyrant, I'm not mean, therefore I'm not in command and control. Like, with the best intentions, you can be in like command and control. And the hope is that we can consider some other ways, like trust and inspire, to move away from that. And so maybe break down trust and inspire, like, generally speaking, what does that look like?
Yeah,
that style of leadership.
Let me give you just a little bit more of a framing for this too, because one of the things you just said is really helpful. Because a lot of people have had an experience where they've worked with, been raised by, been around a command and control leader, and they have decided very clearly that I'm not going to be that.
Was not a positive experience.
Exactly. I'm not going to repeat that. That's not what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. They see this very kind of heavy-handed, very hands-on type of approach. And so sometimes they'll swing the pendulum all the way to the other side. And instead of being hands-on, they'll go hands-off. And then you've got kind of this laissez-faire, free-range parenting kind of thing, where they're not being a command and control leader or parent or person, but they're also not really leading.
There's like no boundaries, no guardrails. It's just, commandments. Okay, maybe we'll consider that sometime, but it's just laissez-faire.
You can do that on the back of things like free agency, for example. You can say, look, hey, I'm giving my teenager free agency to make their own calls. Well, that's true to an extent, but we also have to lead in the process. And so to give you maybe a feel for trust and inspire, there's a reason that the name of the book is not trust and inspiration. Those are both nouns. Those are kind of outcomes and things that we tend to go for. The reason it's called trust and inspire is those are meant to be action words. And so when you've had an experience with a trust and inspire leader, it's because they have done those things. They have been trusting. They have been inspiring. You can look back on the experiences and what those kinds of things have done for you. So when we speak with audiences or work with clients on this, one of the questions that we'll ask is, can you identify a leader that you've worked with, somebody who's had an influence on you, somebody who you've had some sort of engagement? It could be, again, in a religious setting, it could be a coach, it could be a parent, it could be a coworker, a boss, where they have been kind of this kind of leader that we're talking about, where they have believed in you, where they've taken a chance on you, where they've seen some level of potential in you that you may not have seen in yourself. So the subtitle of the book is How Truly Great Leaders Unleash Greatness in Others. And a trust and inspire leader kind of has this paradigm from the start that there is greatness in others.
So you have to start with that assumption, recognizing, But
it's not just an intellectual acceptance of the assumption. So any member of the church, for example, I mean, we've been singing "I Am a Child of God" from as long as we could sing. And so we tend to kind of grasp that intellectually really, really well. And this thing I mentioned earlier about our style getting in the way of our intent. So our intent is this understanding, this intellectual appreciation that we are children of God, and that there is greatness inside each of us. Certainly, we want to feel that about ourselves. And you look at your children, you will know, if you look at them in a good moment, you recognize, you kind of feel in awe, overwhelmed almost sometimes. You recognize how much potential there is in them. Yet, when our children do something that we maybe disagree with, or that we've taught them not to do, or that the ramifications of those actions will cost us a lot of money or time or frustration, what we do is we tend to forget that there is greatness in them. We stop treating them with the dignity and the respect and the honor, and we go command and control. We recognize more clearly than ever our position, our level of authority, and we grab onto that to try to solve a problem. I've always loved the quote. I think this was Thomas S. Monson who said, never let a problem to be solved be more important than a person to be loved. And we do that all the time.
It's almost in our natural man nature, right? Like
Again, we're as a leader in our home or as a leader in our calling, we have a vision for the way things should go. And it's very easy when things don't go according to plan to kind of revert back to this, well, I'm in charge. And so I've got to be decisive and I've got to be active and I've got to, take care of things and handle things. So we tend to slip into that. But if you think to the experience where somebody extended trust to you and somebody believed in you, and you think about what that did for you, for most people, when they look at that, they'll see a couple of things. One, if they look at the circumstances, it was probably at a time where logically it might not have made sense to extend trust to them. You look at what happened with Joseph Smith. We love to recount that story and describe he's a 14-year-old boy. It defies logic the way that all went down. But the Lord sees what we're capable of, and he knows what potential we have inside of us. And great leaders do the same. They not just have an appreciation of the fact that there's greatness inside of others. They see it and they feel it. And if you really, really buy into that, you can't with integrity operate outside of your own paradigm or your own belief. And so what that means is that if I'm going all command and control, it means that my paradigm is allowing for that. I would never walk into a setting with a general authority and start being, a command and control parent in that setting. It would keep me on my best behavior because my paradigm of who they are is so clear that it guides my actions. But I'll tell you right now, as a parent, my paradigm of who my children are at my worst moments, my paradigm shifts to I'm in charge. I need to do something about this. And I lose track of the greatness that is inside of them. Yeah. And I say this with a level of, hopefully a level of humility and a level of self-awareness, because I'm not perfect at this by any means either. Yeah. But I also know times where I've caught myself, or I've had something hit me, beforehand that's reminded me of who I am in relationship to them, or who I am in relationship to my calling or the people that I serve. And when that happens, it totally changes how you see other people's behavior. If you get the chance to look at somebody, for example, who's struggling with addiction, and you see them really with this paradigm, and you see them through the Lord's eyes, the way you approach that problem becomes completely different than if you see them and think, oh, that's not surprising that they're doing this again, or other kinds of, you see them with that level of real honesty, and that changes the way everything looks to you. And trust and inspire leaders see people like this all the time. And it's not easy to do that, but man, it changes the game.
Yeah, it's worth going down that journey and trying to figure that. It's very sanctifying. I mean, we will become more like God on this path. And I love it's a paradigm shift. That's very Covey-esque, right? That instead of worrying about what's getting done, you're worrying about who is this person and from who am I leading? And I want to know them so clearly and treat them as they are, which is a remarkable creation of God that I can trust them, right? And so when you say like trust and inspire, like when it comes between a leader and the person they're leading, like what does it mean? Like what are we doing to trust them? Is that just giving them, trusting them to do certain things, or how like when we begin to trust and inspire this individual, what does that look
so
like?
Let's go back to the idea of trust being a verb, because sometimes when we think of trust as a noun, if somebody asks you about somebody that you serve or have a relationship with, you'll say, yeah, I trust that person, because you have a feeling of trust for them. You have a positive relationship.
They're not going to rob me. They'll act in the best intentions towards me and whatnot, right? Yeah.
When we're talking about this in the context of trust and inspire, trust is both a verb, and not just a verb, but an explicitly action-oriented verb. And I know all verbs are action-oriented, but it's not just that I have a trusting disposition towards somebody. It's that I am engaged in the act of giving them trust. Not just that I feel confidence in them, but that I am trusting them and that I'm communicating to them that I'm trusting them. So the three areas that we look at trusting as kind of a subset of skills or ways of, so what do you do? The first two are kind of how, and it's when we extend trust to somebody, we make sure that the expectations are clear with them. Those are, by the way, mutually clarified expectations, not dictated expectations. Clear expectations and a mutually agreed upon process of accountability. Clear expectations and a process of accountability. Those are key in any circumstance where you're extending trust. Because there's risk to trusting people, and that makes sense. There's risk for them as well. And when you do this, you want to set people up to win. The third component, though, that's kind of an overarching umbrella, is the intent with which we extend trust. Most people, when they extend trust, we think, well, I'm going to trust somebody, one, because I need them to do something. There's something I need done, and I do trust them. And so I'm going to tell them that I trust them, and that will mean something to them. To be trusted is the most inspiring form of motivation. And so they feel that and they tend to respond to that. But again, a lot of times when we trust somebody, there's something in it that's in it for us. Again, otherwise there wouldn't be as much risk for us. The key here in this context that we're talking about is that when we extend trust to other people, we've got to have a very clear intent that we're doing so in order to help them grow. We're doing so in order to help them succeed, not just because we need a result, but that we see part of that result as their actual growth. And a lot of times when trusting goes bad, it's because we needed the result. We really needed the result, and we needed the person that we trusted to be a means to that end. And when we look at it that way, we might get a result, but it limits the person's ability to grow. Maybe we were kind of backseat drove or micromanaged in the process. Our words might say, I trust you, but then the net effect of our behavior, if we're not focused on their growth, tends to circle back to things like micromanagement, over checking in, stuff like that. So when we talk about trusting, we've got to do a really good job at. So
let's try something. I'm good at asking impossible questions, so I'm going to back you into the corner here and see if you can wiggle your way out. So let's imagine you're in a bishopric, you're extending a call to an individual, and maybe as a new Relief Society president or teaching the youth Sunday school or whatnot. Like, what would some of these phrases look like as you walk in there thinking, I'm going to be a trust and inspire leader in this context? Because there's a level of accountability and expectation here. So what are some phrases that maybe you would use in that context? Yeah.
Let me give you a couple of contrasts too in looking at this. So what I would not recommend doing is saying things like, you don't want to understate the importance of it or the gravity. But sometimes when people extend significant trust, they'll be a little bit heavy-handed with it. The Lord's going to expect a lot from you.
We've prayed about this and fasted, and we feel like you're the person. And so, but in a way we're saying, don't muff it,
Totally. The idea is if we're saying or doing anything where the intent of our words is to change anything about them or their approach, that's being manipulative. Even with the best of intentions, that's not going to help them grow or succeed. If you are extending trust, this is good news. If you've come to the conclusion that this person's the right person for this, you feel strongly about that. A couple of things got to happen. One, you really need to trust where the calling came from in the first place. And if you have confidence in that makes your job a whole lot easier. Because if that's the case, your job is to express confidence in that person, express affirmation in them. As it comes to clarifying expectations, I've never called a Relief Society president because I've never been in a bishopric. And after this podcast, I'm sure that will not change. But you've got to clarify expectations in a sense that they know not just what they're responsible to do, but the kinds of things that will allow them to succeed. And that might sound kind of like the same thing, but let me add the other piece to it. When part of that's going to be what you're showing up with, because they're going to ask you, hey, what am I supposed to be doing here? You share some things. I would probably couch it up in the most simple way possible. In the 7 Habits and in Trust and Inspire, in 7 Habits, Stephen R. Covey tells a story about green and clean, son taking care of the lawn and stuff. And in Trust and Inspire, Stephen M.R. tells the same story, but from his perspective, because he was the 7-year-old boy in that story. And his dad, the leader who was giving him the responsibility, is a really good metaphor for this conversation, but he had all sorts of things that he knows need to be done to take care of the lawn and to make it green and clean. He could give you a list of 15 things that you've got to do this, 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 you've got to do this. And that could be overwhelming. What he did in that scenario was he broke it down into just 2 basic things. It's got to be green and got to be clean. How you get to that point is up to you. I'm happy to give you some ways that I do it, but you don't have to do it that way. And so he's offering approaches. The principle is you can't hold people accountable to results when you supervise or dictate their methods. If it really is her calling, the opportunity will be given to her to figure out how to do those things. And again, we're also not moving from command and control to abdicate and abandon. They still need help and they still need direction, but that looks a lot more helpful than it does dictative. And so for taking care of the lawn, it was, look, the goal here is green and clean. Here's how you can do this. For the Relief Society president, this might show my ignorance showing through, but the goal is there's 2 great commandments. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Those if we've done those 2 things, that'll help us be the most successful. How we go about doing that, boy, there's just lots of great stuff in the handbook. I don't expect you to know that inside the immediate future. There's lots of things we can talk about helping, but the goal is love God and love your neighbor. And not just that you feel those things, but that's what they experience. Back to this question about trust. Sometimes people will extend trust to another person, and the person feels like they're given the responsibility. In fact, I'll differentiate between trust and delegation. Because trust includes delegation, but you can delegate somebody without extending trust to them. So if you delegate a responsibility to somebody without extending trust, you're saying, hey, this is your job, this is your ownership, and what they're receiving the job, the delegation, but they might not feel trusted. And this is why, again, this is an action verb. You've got to communicate what you're doing. It's that I'm trusting you. Now, again, even to that approach, a lot of times people will do that with a heavy hand and say, I'm trusting you. And so, I really need you to deliver on this, as opposed to, I'm trusting you because you can do this. I have confidence in you. In fact, forget my confidence. The Lord has confidence in you. And
you're going to do it completely different than I would. And that's how I expect you to do it. So
and by the way, you're going to make mistakes in the process of doing this. And that's all part of this. I want you to know, when you make mistakes, you're not violating either my or the Lord's trust. When you make mistakes, that gives me an opportunity so that we can help figure out maybe what went wrong or what we could do better. But that's the kind of growth that's exactly at the heart of why I'm extending trust to you. I want you to be able to grow.
I love this, because I think some leaders may listen to this and say, David, listen, I delegate a lot. I'm trusting all the time. I'm delegating this and that, but it's important to realize that just delegation doesn't mean you're trusting or you're in this trust and inspire pose, right?
In fact, most of the time, I differentiate. A lot of times when we delegate, we're managing. So I'll contrast management and leadership, and we need both, by the way. And I'm a big believer in management. The problem is when management is for things, schedules, processes, policies, all sorts of things to demand good management. We have to manage our time. We have to manage all sorts of things. But when we manage people the way we would manage things, one, they don't respond well to it. I mean, use yourself as exhibit A. Nobody likes to feel like they're just being moved around the chessboard and another box to check. When you're efficient with people the same way you would be with things, I can delegate from a management standpoint. That's no different than setting an alarm on my phone. When I set an alarm on my phone, I'm just delegating the responsibility of the phone to remember stuff for me. But the phone doesn't feel any different about that. That's its job. It does what it's told. There's a lot of people who look at leadership and development and growth as, would you just do what I'm asking you to do? I mean, gosh, that's all.
This doesn't have to be difficult, and you're making it difficult.
No, but it's not an extension. It's not a meaningful extension of trust, because it doesn't revolve around that person's growth at the same time. So we have to get the result that we're looking for, but we also have to grow people in the process. And I would far rather fail and miss the result at the expense of the person's growth than get the result and have the person not grow in the process.
Yeah.
The person's growth is as important part of the result as any other part. In fact, it's, I think, the most significant part.
And this is such this minor experience that happens over and over and over again. And then when in 10 years down the road, we look back and we think, why is the culture so off here? And culture is so elusive. Like there's no like formula to fix culture after a weekend, because it's built of these little things of like, I just want a result, not growth. But if you focus on growth, then 10 years later, 10 months later, suddenly, man, this word just is jiving, we're just moving.
Look what we're doing now. I mean, this transition of home teaching to ministering is, to me, moving from an enlightened form of command and control, which is, again, good and it's produced just extraordinary things, to something better. And it's not an improvement by degree. It's different in kind. It's a whole new level because of the condition it creates for that growth to occur. Yeah.
And there's some leaders that still want to hold on to that enlightened command and control in the context of ministry. And it just doesn't work.
Part of the problem is that it's easier.
Yeah.
You look at like when you and I were missionaries, the discussions that we had, there were six discussions and they were wrote word for word, and the words came from a prophet. Yeah. So what better words could we use to communicate the gospel?
And I just had, especially learning Spanish, I just had to memorize these words. I didn't know what half of them meant, but I could recite them off. Beautiful. And I could teach a first discussion.
Right, totally. Yeah. There's comfort in that. It's a lot easier. You're mitigating risk by, well, what could happen if these 19-year-old kids go off the rails and say the wrong thing. So let's just program everything they're saying. Now, again, I don't think the intent of the discussions was to contain people. I think it was to be guardrails to help them kind of follow this path. The challenge is, what if we change the question? What if it's not, what if these 19-year-olds start saying their own stuff? We change this to, what if these 19-year-olds start saying their own stuff? What if they're able to actually bear real, meaningful testimony? And again, not that we weren't able to do that before. I had a meaningful experience as a missionary doing it this way. It is better now by an order of magnitude than it was before. Yeah. Same thing, I think, with the change to come follow me, the shift in how we learn the gospel and how we're growing, where it's, it was never explicitly said that it's church-centered, home-supported before, but that's where I got a lot of my. It was sort of almost assumed. That's why else would you go to church? that's why we're there. But then we figure out that the limitation of that over time becomes people who are, Sunday members of the church, and they might be active, but not necessarily converted. Yeah. And so that's another distinction I would give. The enlightened command and control might be activity or being active, which is a good thing, and it can lead to conversion. And there's lots of active people who are converted. I also worry there's a lot of active people who aren't converted. Yeah. And so the trust inspired piece is moving to where the focus is less on activity and more on conversion. And so come follow me is, I remember, I think it was 2018 that the first Come Follow Me manual came out. And I think it's like right in the first sentence or the first paragraph, it says, the goal is conversion. What if it said the goal is compliance? How different would that look if that was the case? Now, again, it's never explicitly been that, but the problem is, absent the growth, we slip into and take great comfort in compliance. Yeah. And I would say, as human beings, we want to do things the right way. Like, am I doing it right? I feel like I'm off. And so just give me some compliance so that I know I'm doing it right. Totally. So, and then over time we realize, we're only striving for compliance and not anything else. Yeah. That part though, where we're kind of in the woods and not sure what we're doing. Yeah. That's where we're growing. Yeah. That's where we're reaching through the mists of darkness to try to find the iron rod. Yeah. Most of us are not clinging to it our entire lives. We also weren't meant to be chained to it. And I think about and you look at trust inspired compared to command and control, the two plans were presented in the beginning. And one of them was, hey, we're not going to lose anybody. We're going to have absolute results, absolute performance. Compliance heavy, right? Totally. Yeah. But again, also results heavy. Yeah. We get the end goal is that we don't lose anybody. Now, obviously that's not the plan that was gone with, because what needs to happen while we're here is not just that we
Mhm.
don't get lost,
Mhm.
but it's that we find who we are. We
Yeah.
find who the Lord is, that we learn the things that we need to learn. And that doesn't always happen when it's sunshine and roses and no challenges or difficulty. The Savior was a man of sorrows. But that doesn't mean he didn't experience great joy.
Mhm.
Sometimes we talked about this in Sunday, the difference between entertainment or fun and joy. And, it wasn't said, men are that they might have a good time. We're supposed to grow. And a lot of times our happiest and most joyful experiences come from the toil, from the struggle, from that environment. The challenge is, and I'll tell you this right now as a parent of 3, oh man, I don't want my kids to struggle.
Yeah.
I don't want to see them hurt or suffer. But you know where they grow the most is through that struggle. The other challenge is, though, I don't want to give them unnecessary struggle. And sometimes in our intent to keep them from making some huge mistake, we contain people. And again, all out of love, but we limit their ability to grow. Yeah. So, again, as you talk about being, a new bishop, extending a calling to somebody else, extending trust, part of this is the confidence that they can grow and will do with this. And if they don't, Lord will provide a way.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
I love that, just sort of wrapping up this concept of delegation and also extending callings, which, kind of similar things. I love how you referenced the green and clean story. That would be a great, a parable you could call it for a bishopric to sit with and say, when we invite people, like just seeing how Stephen Covey Sr. approached that with, I'm just going to give him 2 words, just 2 expectations, simple. And then I'm going to trust him with to figure out everything else. And, you boiled it down in the release side, maybe 2 concepts that they could do, but just going through that exercise of saying, as I extend this calling, what are the 2 things that we really expect of him? I think the problem isn't that I think the main problem is we don't give him anything. It's sort of like, will you be the elders quorum president? They're like, sure. All right, we'll set you apart on Sunday. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, what do you expect of me? Like, that is such a crucial.
No, I don't want to micromanage you. You just.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then we hands off leadership, right? Like, just have fun, just love the elders. And that's it. Well, okay. And then we show up on, Sunday and we don't know what to do because the expectation hasn't been put in place. So I love that. The green and clean is a great place for leaders to go and contemplate over. One aspect I want to slip in here is like this dynamic we have. You think of the corporate setting, the CEO, the executive, like, yeah, they can fire me, so they have some authority. In our dynamic, it's more of like the authority is like this holy doctrine. And so there's sort of this hush around it, like, well, the bishop holds keys. And so we should probably just do whatever he commands and whatever he wants to control. We should just follow that. Right. Yeah. And, anything else that we haven't said already that in this context of like in an organization where we feel like an individual actually has divine keys to lead, how can we still find that trust and inspire? Or how can a leader who has those keys still trust and inspire?
Yeah. It's not, you just hit kind of this, sometimes taking a hands-off approach. If command and control is hands-on, and abdicate and abandon is hands off. What we're searching for is really hand in hand. I love the visual of hands on because when you think about that, when that kind of language hit me for this, I envisioned being at Disneyland or Walmart or somewhere where you've got a family together and you see a parent where they'll grab their child by the arm and kind of haul them in a direction. Yeah. That's not what we're doing. That's not what we're going for. Hand in hand just evokes a different kind of feel that we're succeeding together. There's a sense of care. There's a sense of belonging that gets created. I love the Joseph Smith quote that I'm sure everybody who follows you is familiar with is, teach people good principles and let them govern themselves. Again, back to the green and clean story. He didn't just say, hey, green and clean, good luck. The lawnmower's in the garage. He to go a little bit deeper into this story, what he did was he gave him 2 weeks of training. And let me differentiate again. What he didn't do was give him 2 weeks of programming or conditioning, which again, I love this contrast between am I doing this because I'm conditioned or because I'm converted? The outcome of those are two very, very different things. But what he did over that time was he walked him through. He offered to be his helper in this process, which evokes kind of a sense of servant leadership. He also, after he gave him the responsibility, he waited a period of time for him to do stuff. In fact, this goes back to the accountability. What they did when they set up the agreement of taking over the job was he said, okay, how will we know we're winning? Which is, to the question you asked the elders quorum president, to those two things. How will we know we're winning? Well, green clean's one, but how can I help you make sure that we're, on the right track and that we're delivering? And the way he set up accountability is they agreed together to walk the yard, once a week, and just kind of see how things were going. And during that process, Stephen, as a 7-year-old, would tell his dad how things were going. In fact, we've had clients where they've taken that principle for accountability, and they call it walk the yard. We're going to walk the yard. And what that means is that I'm coming to you and you're going to let me know what's going on. What do you need help with? How are things going? How do you feel about how things are going? Not me going to you and saying, it's time to walk the yard. Come here. Let me show you what you missed here, what you missed here. It's a different approach. Sometimes when people hear the word accountability, we tend to think, oh yeah, I hold people accountable. That's one of the things I'm known for. I hold people accountable. Absolutely. Better way to look at accountability is that we hold ourselves accountable first, and that we help others also hold themselves accountable. It's a totally different approach. But what happened when he gave him the responsibilities, at first he did nothing, didn't do anything. Yeah. And when he tells the story, he describes, I over the weekend didn't do anything, nothing Saturday, nothing Sunday, and that's fine. Hopefully it's Monday. Maybe he'll do something today. Comes back from work on Monday, hasn't done anything, goes to work again. It's Tuesday, it's hot. The yard's just burning up. And he comes home and again, nothing's been done. There's garbage all over the place. And he finds himself, again, parent of a 7-year-old, thinking, oh boy, maybe this was just too much for him to handle. He wanted to take it back and say, you know what, this just isn't going to work. But what he did is he went and talked to the 7-year-old and say, hey, let's walk the yard. Let's figure this out. And the 7-year-old had been kind of, Stephen had been avoiding this confrontation the whole time. And he just breaks down and starts crying. Yeah. And he says, Dad, it's so hard. He says, well, what's hard, son? You haven't done one thing. Yeah. But having the accountability loom over you, or the fear of what you've done or not done in the amount of time you should have done, what happened when he actually talked to his father is the same thing that happens to us when we repent. He's not like, yep, knew this is how it was going to go. I mean, he should know. It shouldn't be a surprise. But what we tend to find is an opportunity for us to figure out where we need to be, and for us to figure out what went wrong. Just because we're an elders quorum president or relief society president, we may be replacing somebody else. Sometimes it's challenging because, if it's a new ward, you're kind of starting with a clean slate. That's a little bit different. But if you're stepping into something that may have worked really well,
like her yard was, relief society yard was really green and clean. Yeah.
Exactly. You start to feel like you've got to step into somebody else's shoes and do what they would do. Well, guess what? They were released. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they went about, they found a way to have love and care and a sense of belonging in their calling. But there's a reason that you were put here. You would probably do things different. In fact, you should be doing things different. And people need to feel comfort in knowing that if they fail or if they make a mistake, that's part of the process. But most of us, no matter what anybody else says, we tend to hold ourselves accountable to this sense of fear or concern because of, again, our experiences in the past that we can't fail or make a mistake. Most of us, when we get a big calling, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it's not like I feel like, finally my time has come. The Lord has recognized that I'm the right person to do this job. It's, how am I going to do this? Yeah. You feel, a reverent sense of self-doubt or concern. You tend to lose a little bit of faith in the process. But if you can get the right perspective, if you really, again, buy into this idea that there's greatness in people, that I'm a child of God, it comes with it an acceptance that you've got what you need to do this. And that you'll figure it out along the way. And again, it's easy to give other people that rope, but sometimes it's really hard to give that to ourselves.
Yeah. I love this, this concept of, because there's probably leaders listening say, David, listen, I tried that. I tried the trust and inspire thing. If you were in my ward, you'd understand these people. And, we're a volunteer organization. Can you really trust them so far? I mean, they're here voluntarily and just doing their best and whatnot. So I kind of feel like I need to have my fingers in a lot of things and whatnot. So it's not going to work for me. Right. But going back to that concept of keys and authority, like that, just you now have authority to walk the yard with them, not to step in and do their job or tell them how to do it. But you now have this great ministry with them, like the Savior had. Well, it seems like more than half the time in the Gospels, he's walking the yard with his disciples and talking through these things, right? And so, anything else you'd say for that leader is just like, no, like I tried this and I tell my counselor, I trust him on Sunday, and he shows up the next Tuesday or the next Sunday and he hasn't done anything. And, it's just so frustrating. And I've already got my day job and I just need to do it. Anything you'd add there?
Yeah. That's a hard way to live. First off, most people it's easy for us to slip into the old adage, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Mm-hmm. The problem is then you just don't get stuff done or whatever you're
miserable and burnt out.
Yeah. Miserable and burnt out. This was the lesson that Jethro gave to Moses.
Yeah.
You've got to learn how to delegate. But again, what we're talking about is you've got to learn how to extend trust. It's really hard to do that if your mindset is just as you described it. Look, I did trust them. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. That's not what Stephen's dad said when he did nothing on the lawn. He wanted to say that. If it didn't work yet. You're just not to where, you can't force the growth to happen for somebody else. If you give your counselor responsibility and they drop the ball, they probably know they dropped the ball. It's an opportunity to walk the yard. Say, hey, how could I better support you to make sure to help set up? Because again, what we're usually worried about in that instance is they dropped the ball, and so I didn't get the result that I was looking for. But if we go back to what we just talked about, as big or bigger than any of that is, if they drop the ball, that's telling me that they're not at the level of growth or haven't grown in or aren't. There's something that they're experiencing for themselves. I've got to look at them with a lens of empathy rather than just focusing on the performance or the outcome.
Yeah.
And we look at things like activity, and it gets really easy to think, well, because somebody's not showing up on Sunday, boy, what do I do to get them to church on Sunday? How do we get them to start showing up? And then we think of things like, oh, well, maybe what we could do is drop by on this day, or we could, but all the while, and those are all good things, but the whole time, the question we're trying to answer is, how do I get them to church? We're asking, how do I get them to show some level of outward obedience to something that they might not be inwardly bought into yet? I love the temple. I think one of the scariest things would be to send somebody to the temple who's not converted to that point, or where they'll go and they'll perform the ordinances, but they don't feel or experience things. This really go unprepared. Yeah. The same thing happens on Sunday when we take the sacrament. There's a percentage of people in the room who are taking the sacrament. They're having a holy experience. They're having extraordinary connection with the Lord, with their testimony. And there are some people who are eating bread and drinking a little bit of water. There's nothing different about the bread and the water, yet somehow we feel like because they're there that day doing that thing, that must be an indicator of where they're at. Yet there are probably a lot of people who are at home in our ward at the same time who might be in a better spiritual position than somebody doing that same thing. So it's not just about what's being done, it's about what is going into that, how people are experiencing it, and again, getting to the point where they're finding meaning in what they're doing. Yeah.
And the good news is it's not that we have to abandon positive results by being a trust inspired leader. We will have remarkable results, and beyond our wildest dreams, the positive progress we'll have there It just has to come a different way, more authentic way, more converted way, and it's long lasting.
Yeah, what we tend to know, and the reason that we tend to go command and control is because we are afraid of losing control.
Yeah.
What if I try this and it doesn't work? What if I go down this path and all this great stuff that needs to happen doesn't happen? Let me maybe put it this way, because sometimes stuff like this, trust and inspire, that sounds really nice. That sounds warm and fuzzy, soft.
Right.
But gosh dang it, things have to be done sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We need people who are decisive. We need people who are strong, who invoke a sense of significance to the work that they're doing. Let me put it this way: you can be strong without being forceful. You can be decisive without being autocratic. You can be visionary and have vision for your ward or for your group or whoever you're working with without being exclusive or exclusionary about other people's thoughts or parts of it and worrying about how that might conflict with your way of thinking. And you can be in charge and have control without being controlling. In fact, I would argue that in a trust and inspire culture, you have far more control than you'll ever have in a command and control culture. And again, the question is, what are people going to do when you're not there? See, conversion has a lot more predictive quality to it about how people are going to approach things than does compliance, than does just simply, going through the motions or doing the things. The problem is we can measure some of the outward things that are happening. It's harder to measure the stuff that's going on internally. But if our paradigm is that, again, there's greatness in people, that leadership is really stewardship. I've always loved the doctrine of the eternal family that, when I look at my children, I have to reckon I'm calling them my children because, I'm responsible for them. I have a stewardship for them. But it's different if I look at them from the standpoint that I have a stewardship for them than I do if I have an ownership of them, that they're mine. It adds a greater sense of gravity and a sense of reverence when I recognize that I'm being entrusted. So stewardship is a job with a trust. I'm being entrusted with their care. They don't belong to me. In fact, they're as much my brother or sister as anybody else. And I've been entrusted to help them grow and help them learn. I haven't been entrusted to just keep them out of trouble, or to have them follow a certain path and do a certain thing. I've been entrusted to help them become something, not seem something or do something, but to become something. Yeah. And that's powerful. Different.
And one other aspect that as leaders move towards this trust and inspire style of leadership, it's not command and control like you mentioned, it's easy for the leader. It's just sort of a default position. It seems easier or whatnot. But a lot of times for those we lead, it can be easier. They almost want the command and control. Like, Bishop, just tell me what to do. Like, why do we do this song and dance and ward council? And, you want to, want us to go out and have autonomy and I'll just, what do you want from me? Just tell me and I'll go do it. Right. I want to be a good soldier and go do that. And so there can be that resistance that a lot of people who are the followers almost want the command and control because it can seem easier.
Yeah, I love that you say that. It's interesting. A lot of our language today comes from military terms. You talk about like a company, that's a military term. Being on the front lines, that's a military term. Command and control is a military term. Yeah. There's not a bad connotation to it, but we tend to think sometimes about leadership in somewhat militaristic views. But even the military, in fact, the military has changed the definition of command and control. I'll give you an example of this. So, I'm trying to remember his name. General Stanley McChrystal. He retired recently, but really well known in the military. One of the mantras that he had on his team was, in this environment where you're giving orders and people are expected to follow orders and be a good soldier and all of that. But the mantra on their team was, if when you get on the ground, the orders we gave you are not the right orders, then execute the order we should have given you. And so what he's saying is that, we're going to go into this with a plan, but the outcome we're shooting for is more important than the plan that we've built to get there. And you're going to have to use your own judgment and make some turns. It's a lot of trust that goes with that. It's also a lot of responsibility that comes with that too, because now the call's yours. But the reason they're giving you that call is because you've been prepared to do that. You look at like the special forces. In fact, we've worked with General Martin Dempsey, who was over over SOCOM and oversaw the raid on Osama bin Laden. And we've talked about trust with his group and team. And you look at the SEALs, and they go through 6 years of training. And what they're told is, okay, you guys, there's normal rules of engagement, and then you guys just go out and get the bad guy, and you go out and do your thing. But they're not like saying, okay, welcome to the SEALs, sign your name down here so we can get rid of liability, and then go get the bad guy. They take the time to do the training, to work with people so that their growth and development is happening. Now, there'll be different. We're not training SEALs. The stakes are different. The implications are different. But we've also got to be providing our kids, the people that we serve with in our calling, the people in our ward, we've got to be providing them with options and choices that they can make, because as they make those choices and they make mistakes and they fail, they'll grow. None of us signed up to come here and say, no, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Again,
that was the other plan.
That was the other group. That ship has sailed. They're gone.
You didn't get on that train.
That might sound nice, but that's not what we're here for. Yeah. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's also not what we really want. And if we look at the things that we've done where there's been significance, that's not where we want to go either. We talked a lot about trust. The connection to inspiration in this is so important because people do want to be trusted, and that in and of itself is inspiring. But people don't want to just do a good job or fulfill a calling or check the box. That sounds nice in the beginning, but that doesn't last. Mm-hmm. It's a difference between, again, success and significance. You look at, somebody who retires, lives their whole life, does their work. Most people who retire, a lot of people who retire, it sounds nice to go play golf all day, every day, and just kind of, waste away. But senior missionaries they probably arrived at a level of success before deciding to go on a mission. What they're going for is significance. We start this life, we go on this continuum where we start from a position of having we start from a position of needing to survive, right? We've got needs that we've got to meet. We've got temporal needs. We've got stuff. It's hard to talk to somebody about significance or really meaningful, inspirational things if they're starving. And we know this is part of our approach with welfare. It's a continuum and a process, and there's a sequence to this that matters. We move from survive up to thrive, where we're actually doing well, and we're picking up speed. That moves into a level of success. And a lot of us spend our lives kind of imagining that point of envisioning what success looks like, only to find out that when we get there, it's not what we hoped it would be. Yeah. What we're going for here is significance. The tragedy is if we wait our whole career thinking, okay, I'll get to significance after I get to success, and there is a continuum here, but we can have significance now. There's no reason to not have that. So when we talk about this idea of tapping into inspiration for people, in the church, we use the term inspiration to a lot of times to denote where we might get direction for something. We felt inspired. We felt like there was some kind of divine communication. That happens in more than just being told, what to do. We feel inspired when we're doing things that tie into a sense of meaning or purpose or contribution for us. And the job of a leader, we argue that leaders have 3 stewardships. Trusting is one of those. Inspiring is one of those. We're saying that if you're a leader, inspiration is your job. It's not just something that might happen or could happen if the stars align and you play your cards right. That's a deliverable. That's something you're accountable to be doing. Again, people get burnt out because they fulfill the calling, they do the work, but the renewal doesn't come. The Spirit and inspiration gives you strength beyond your own normal capacity. Inspiration is a skill. It's an ability. It's a muscle that we can grow. And the most inspiring church leaders are not inspiring because they're charismatic. That helps. It's not a bad thing, but we oftentimes equate earthly, somebody being inspirational here as well. They're charismatic, or they've had some great story that that they can tell. Even think about it, if you invite an inspirational speaker to come do a fireside or something like that, they're coming to tell some powerful story, or because they've got the ability to story tell really well. And you watch somebody like that and you think, well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not me. I can fulfill my calling, but I'm not an inspirational person. Bottom line is, I've known a lot of very charismatic people who aren't inspiring at all. And at the same time, I've known some of the most inspiring people I've known aren't necessarily charismatic.
Yeah.
In fact, when I think about a trust and inspire leader that I've worked with, there's a couple of youth leaders in particular that come to mind. They were great people. They didn't inspire me because they were entertaining or interesting or charismatic. They inspired me because they cared about me. Not just because they cared, but because I experienced that care. I felt that. And so I think one of the biggest things for, especially serving the church where there's nobody's getting a paycheck to do this. We're doing this for meaning. Yet at the same time, we can also do this completely without meaning. You look at teaching, for example, one of the most inspiring fields in industries that there is, but 40% of teachers leave the field after 5 years. They spend almost all of that time before even starting going through the training to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up not staying. Why? Because they end up going into a system that takes everything associated with purpose that they were excited about in the beginning, and it just beats them to death. It beats it all out of them. The inspire comes from the Latin word inspirare, which means to breathe life into. A lot of times those who are struggling with their calling, or they've got too many things on their family plate, they feel like they're having life sucked out of them. They feel like church service is not inspiration, it's expiration.
Yeah.
If I keep doing this, I cannot burn the candle at both ends. They're not inspired.
Yeah.
And when that's the case, the worst thing that we can do is leave them there drowning. I've had times in my life where I've just not had a calling, because as I've communicated and met with my bishop, who by the way, isn't just holding interviews with me because that's what he's supposed to do. He's checking in on me because, and I recognize this, I recognize a sense of huge caring.
He's breathing life into you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes that looks like a released calling.
Right. Yeah.
Where it can come back in, because again, you go back to some of these great quotes in the church, no success in life can compensate for failure in the home. No success in church service can compensate for failure in the home either. Mm-hmm. And I've had a lot of callings where the calling's been a huge time commitment, and it's also helped me in my family. Because if I'm inspired by what I'm doing and I take that and I apply that, see, sometimes we get inspired by the calling and the people that we serve and these fundamental beliefs of seeing greatness in people. We see those in all the people that we serve, and we kind of just hope our family will keep up, and maybe our spouse will take care of the family stuff.
Yeah, pick up the slack.
Exactly. While we lose the ability to do those other things. The idea behind inspiration is that I will be made equal to the task. And sometimes it might look like that. Sometimes it might look like my spouse is carrying extra weight. Sometimes it might look like I recognize that my spouse is drowning and I've got to summon the strength or the ability to do all of these things. Well, I'm only one person. So then it starts to become really attractive to figure out, how can I extend trust to another person to help me with this so that I can work through what I'm doing. Yeah. Trust Inspire leaders are always doing a lot, but it's the whole idea of magnifying your calling, your position, and magnifying other people in the process. This gives you a system. The intent of this book is to give you a framework for, these all sound nice, how can I do this in the context of my day-to-day? How can I get better at extending trust to people? How can I learn how to proactively choose to inspire people in small ways? Because again, that looks great. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
All right, David. Elder Kasperson, we've come a long way from that apartment in East Sacramento.
Man.
You actually figured it out. You did something with your life. I wasn't sure for
well, I mean, we'll see. It's only been, this book's only been out a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so. We'll see. Well, Wall Street Journal, come on.
That's a good start.
They don't let anybody on that list. So, I hope people go check it out. And like I mentioned, if there was, I read a lot of books, interview a lot of authors. And if there's just one book, I'm like, here, just read this book. If you can only read this book, just read this book. There's others I consider, like Liz Wiseman's Multipliers and, some of Stephen R. Covey's stuff. But this one is just such a good, just read this and you'll be inspired of maybe a next step, some things you can do. And so people should check it out.
Yeah. Right? You get this right. And it buys you some leeway to figure out the other stuff.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out that stuff anyways.
Yeah.
But this is a great way to magnify immediately and help grow the people you have, the people you've been given opportunity to serve, so that you're doing all of this together.
So Amazon obviously is selling it.
Yeah, Amazon,
airport bookstores, as you know.
If we make it real big, we'll hit Deseret Book. I don't know. We'll see about that.
I'm sure it'll be in Deseret Book. And anything else other than just checking out the book, if people want to learn more about, Stephen M.R. Covey's and your good work, where would you send them?
FranklinCovey, our company has great resources. Speedoftrust.com has some good stuff. Trustinspire.com is brand new. I think it's mostly a landing page right now. Okay. But really check out the book. There's we didn't hold anything back. This was not done with the intent of if we get people to read the book, then we'll get some good stuff happening. You can do a lot of great stuff with this. It's a great way to get started. And really where I tell people to go is the leading saints.
Oh yeah. You just start there and then you'll figure it out.
It's just got so much.
Oh, go on.
So much good stuff. It's a library. You got to find Trust Inspire here. You'll find
let's just say Wall Street Journal hasn't called me yet. So awesome. The last question I have for you is just on your journey as one of the co-authors of this book, being guided through these principles, having to sit down and articulate them, type them out. How has this process helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
For me, the reason I got to be a co-author on this in the first place, I kind of saw myself as almost a patient zero in this. I was the recipient more than anything of this kind of somebody leading me in this way. And I've been a recipient of this, being led this way, as a youth. I've been the recipient in my work, working with Stephen. I've been the recipient of this kind of leadership from the Savior, from my spouse. It's interesting. We spent 6 years writing this book. And for all the knowledge that I had, you kind of come into it thinking you have to offer and to give because of what you've seen. Mm-hmm. Where it really comes alive is in what you start to do. I'm as much a patient in this as anybody else. The biggest barrier, we've had this question asked, the biggest barrier to becoming a Trust Inspire leader tends to be the fact that we think we already are one. And I think the biggest barrier to really embracing discipleship of the Savior is sometimes, especially if we're put in a leadership calling, same seat I sat in writing this book thinking, okay, I've got to offer what I've learned to share here and to give. Sometimes we lose track of the things that we need to be doing. It took 6 years to write this book. 2 years ago, I really started to dig into this for a person, or for myself as a person. Totally changed my marriage. And I found the same thing to be true with following the Savior. As a missionary or as in a leadership calling, it's really easy to spend a lot of your time, ministering and sharing things you feel guided and directed to share. Most of the magic really happens in your time spent deliberately trying to grow closer to the Savior. I can't tell you how much I've looked at callings I've had or opportunities where I've tried so hard to do a good job at the calling, and then I've just completely let dwindle my own personal efforts at drawing closer to the Savior. Where being a disciple of Jesus Christ, being better at that will automatically magnify all of my abilities to do everything else I'm doing. So I go back to just doubling down your own efforts on drawing closer to the Savior, living the way that you would tell other people to live consistently.
That concludes this episode of the Leading Saints podcast. We'd love to hear from you about your questions or thoughts or comments. You can either leave a comment on the post related to this episode at leadingsaints.org or go to leadingsaints.org/contact and send us your perspective or questions. If there's other episodes or topics you'd like to hear on the Leading Saints podcast, go to leadingsaints.org/contact and share with us the information there. And we would love for you to share this with any individual you think this would apply to, especially maybe individuals in your ward council or other leaders that you may know who would really appreciate the perspectives that we discussed. And remember, go to leadingsaints.org/14 to access our full Liberating Saints virtual library.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness. The loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.